Okay, so thank you for coming, and I'm very excited to talk to you about caregiver and child speech interactions. So before today morning's talks, this was my title, but I think it's important to make a distinction that I'm going to be talking about humans and not robots. Okay, so let's get into it. Imagine being a young infant thrown into this vast unknown world. One of the greatest challenges they face is learning about this world around them. Luckily, they don't have to do it alone. Caregivers, by providing speech input, not only give infants information about the objects, but also are vital partners for their language learning. Why does this speech input matter? We know that language input, in terms of both quantity as well as quality, is vital for children to learn language. In fact, studies show that the quantity of language that children hear, as well as the lexical diversity, predicts their lexical achievement. But is any kind of speech sufficient? What about speech quality? Right now, I'm giving a talk, and my voice is one of the most powerful tools I have to get your attention. With the right combination of pitch and pace, I can hopefully help you to better understand what I want to say. But if I talk like this, super monotonous, without any emphasis, if I go super fast or I go super slow, you're going to have a lot harder time actually understanding what I want to convey. And it's not much different for infants. You might have heard of baby talk, which sounds something like this.
Hi, baby. I see the duck. You have a duck on your shirt.
Okay, so there is a specific register of speech called infant-directed speech, which is characterized by a few things. The first is higher and more variable pitch. The second is limited vocabulary. The third are longer pauses, and the fourth are shorter utterances. There has been some research on how IDS, in terms of parental pitch, changes longitudinally. This study with Norwegian parent-child dyads up to 18 months showed that parental pitch remains largely stable. There's also another study in English looking at dyads up to 24 months, and they saw that there was a gradual decrease in the pitch. So there is conflicting evidence for these longitudinal changes in parental pitch. There is already an established body of research looking into caregiver input in terms of IDS. We know that infants across multiple different countries show an increased preference for infant-directed speech over adult-directed speech. IDS is associated with improved infant attention, vocalization, as well as language acquisition. And lastly, developmental studies show that this dependency on IDS, specifically for word learning, wanes across development. Alongside this, there is also research on infant active learning and interests, because infants are not just passive, they also actively learn from the environment around them. We know that infants learn and retain words better when they're interested in the category to which that word belongs. In general, they retain actively elicited information, such as by pointing, better. And a closely related study showed that the quality of caregiver-child interaction is actually predicted by caregivers' perception of their child's interests. The study that I'm going to be talking about today lies at the intersection of these two fields. What do we want to understand? Firstly, do caregivers have higher quality IDS when they perceive the book to be of higher interest to the child? That is their IDS more IDS-y somehow? Secondly, do infants vocalize more while being read books that caregivers perceive to be of higher interest to them? And lastly, does this caregiver IDS change over development? To do this, we use the following methodology. Infants and parents were invited into the lab when infants were about 18 months old. Parents had already filled out a questionnaire on their child's interests about these different categories, and then there was a shared book reading session. They read 2 books to their kids from these 6 categories, and the same thing was repeated at 24 months. So, at each session, they read 1 high interest and 1 low interest book to their child. Because of time constraints, I'm not going too much into the data collection, but this was part of a larger study, and you can find the details at this QR code. What were we interested in? Speech characteristics. For caregivers, we looked at mean pitch, pitch range, that is minimum and maximum pitch, as well as the duration of utterance. We also looked at the number of infant vocalizations. Just so you get an idea of what actually happened in the lab, this is what it looked like.
Das Fell, sie trinkt gerne mit.
Ja. Keine.
Was ist das jetzt?
Oh, großer Bär.
Großer Bär, ne? Siehst du, jetzt erkennst du den auch, ne? Und ist ein ganz großer Bär. Dickes, braunes Fell und er wohnt im Wald. Und was ist der Bär?
Das Bär.
Was ist der Bär?
Lila.
Meer ist der. Mhm. Und was ist der Bär in deinem Wimmelbuch? Was isst der da gerne? Der isst da gerne Honig, ne?
Ja.
Und was ist das?
Ein Pferd.
Ein Pferd. Und was ist das?
Eine Maus.
Das ist ja eine Riesen.
So for those of you that don't speak German, the mom was just talking to the child about different kinds of animals and interacting during the book reading. What did we find? We saw a significant interaction between duration and age. That is, for younger infants, caregiver utterances were shorter when they were reading high-interest books. And as the infants got older, these caregiver utterances got longer when they were reading high-interest books. So I'm going to make a bit of a bold claim, just bear with me here for a second, and say that caregivers appear to tailor their IDS to get their children's attention. That is, for the younger infants, caregivers are using shorter utterances because it's easier for the children to parse those. And as the infants get older, they also increase the length of their utterances, potentially giving more information to the child about categories that they're interested in. Looking at the infants, we saw that across both time points, infants vocalize more during high-interest book readings. This points to the existence of a positive feedback loop. Caregivers speak longer as their infants are more vocal. Contrary to our expectations, we saw no significant changes in pitch characteristics between the high-interest and the low-interest categories. This is surprising, and why could this be? We know that IDS is multidimensional. It has many different facets. In fact, there was a longitudinal study looking at infants up to 19 months where they looked at hyperarticulation, pitch, and affect. They found that after 9 months, hyperarticulation was the only factor to predict infant vocabulary development. This could point to the fact that caregivers may rely on factors other than pitch to guide infant attention. Looking at the longitudinal data, we saw that mean pitch showed a decreasing trend while the pitch range increased significantly. This significant increase in the pitch range could be indicative of greater variability in caregiver utterances as their children get older. We also saw that the duration of utterance decreased longitudinally, and this contradicts previous findings. But it's important to remember that we measured the duration in seconds here and not in morpholexical units as is done usually. Then, the decrease in the duration of utterance could be because caregivers might be more familiar with the books in the second session and are thus reading faster to their older infants. This immediately leads to the next interesting question of what are caregivers actually saying to their kids during these book readings? And that is ongoing exciting work in our lab where we're trying to transcribe and categorize these parent utterances to see what are they actually saying and what is the information content that they're giving to their infants. So, the take-home messages, bringing it back to the research questions. Do caregivers have higher quality IDS? Yes, in some cases, and no difference for the pitch characteristics. Do infants vocalize more while being read books that caregivers perceive to be of higher interest to them? Yes, they do. And lastly, does caregiver IDS change over development? Yes, there are some factors of it that change as the infants get older. With this, I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone without whom this research would not be possible. So my supervisor, the research group collaborators, all the participating families, research assistants, as well as the funding bodies. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. We have time for some questions. Yes, Katharina.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was a little bit surprised that you focus only on the vocal behavior and only on the pitch, because as you showed in your example, the dyad is very closely together, and actually the child is sitting on the lap. So it is possible to also do some emphasis by motion.
Yeah.
So. Have you considered that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the previous study that I actually talked about, which was closely related to this, when I say the quality of caregiver-child interaction, that was looking at motion. So they did look at how interactive the parents are, how enthusiastic they are, and how much motion is there. And yeah, you're right. It's a possible future direction. We could look into what's actually happening by motion in those videos.
We have a question there by Sam.
Hi, really interesting. Sorry if I missed it, but how did you gauge the parent interest in the books? And did you think about looking at kind of moment by moment fluctuations in the child's engagement while they were reading the book?
Yeah, so that's also a fair point. So when I say that we assessed parent interest, it was this kind of questionnaire that they filled out. So there were different questions where they indicated how interested do you think your child is interested in one category versus the other. So that was kind of the parent perception of the child interest. And like I said, this is part of a larger study. So we also have some data on category interest of the children themselves. So we look at pupillary dilation measures for different objects from those categories. And that, I think, would be a more fine-grained interest, if I understand your question correctly. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and you could also just look at whether they're looking at the book or not, while they're being read to. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Could the next speaker already come down here, please? So maybe we find one or the other more question. And if that's over there, yes.
Thank you for the nice talk. So I also, I like your argument about the tailoring, because we know that parents tailor their talk, their input. But it's also possible that did you try, that there's also a variation with their vocabulary knowledge at this case. So maybe it's also they tailor based on the child's understanding of specific words. Mm-hmm. So, from the first time to the second time. So I just wonder whether you actually take that into account.
No, in this study we haven't, but that's a good point. I think we'll look at that when we look into what the kids are actually saying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give a warm applause to Shreya. And our next talk will be by and colleagues with the title Intrinsic.
Do you want it over your head or in the hand?
Robotic manipulation tasks.